Welcome viewers to this extended highlights video, which is covering rounds 4 and 5 of the EKS, which took place earlier this month at Buckmore Park Kart Circuit and at Rowrah respectively. These rounds were the third rounds of the Southern and Northern Championships respectively, and without further ado, we can take you through the action from Buckmore Park. This round saw a fantastic turnout of 46 drivers, and all the drivers were split up into their own dedicated grids for each class. It was the junior class though that took to the circuit. First of all, they raced in their own group of 12 drivers, and it's Frederick Burden who put it on pole position in the one-shot qualifying session, qualifying on pole by nearly 6/10 ahead of Zach Hassan. That was very impressive from them both, considering both of them are brand new to Buckmore Park. Frederick then converted that great pace that he showed in the one-shot quality to win race 1 by over 9 seconds ahead of the entire field of karts, with Charlie Foster coming home in P2. Charlie unfortunately had a racing incident with Alfie Schrubb during the race as they headed into Garda, which caused Alfie Schrubb to spin, which was gutting for him, having been up at the sharp end during the race. It's Jack Redfern who came home in P3 in the end as he beat Zach Hassan, who held on to P4 ahead of Oliver Cohn, and it's Thomas Walton who then came home in P6. George Larkin did come home in 4th place on the road, but he unfortunately was disqualified for not getting himself weighed after the race. As a result, he finished down in P12. Thomas Wong came across the line in 5th position, but received a 5-second penalty for a bump and pass post-race. The lightweight drivers then took to the circuit for their first race of the day. It's Callum Bendelow who put it on pole position in the one-shot qualifying with 50.9, beating James King on James's first visit to Buckmore Park, and Callum held on to win the race by 1/10 of a second ahead of James, having had a race-long battle with him for the win. Lawrence Seagraves stunned everyone to finish all the way up in P3, having raced in split 3 at Tamworth. He did a fantastic job though to finish ahead of Andreas Dimitriades, with debutant Carl Evans finishing up in P5. This is what the race winner Callum Bendelow had to say after the race.
And now we're joined by Callum Bendelow, winner of the last race. Callum, how was that?
Yeah, it was good. First race that was. It was a little bit offensive from James King, but I managed to do it well and then managed to get P1 at the end, so just about. So I was okay with it. So
I mean, no matter how close it was a great drive, and we look forward to seeing more of it. You excited?
It depends how it goes really, and hope it's luck for me. So like I was at Tamworth, but I hope it's luck today, so that's all I need to do, so like that.
Alright, you got to keep driving, man. Well, good luck out there, and we'll see you on track.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will, yeah.
The heavyweight drivers then took to the circuit in what was a sold-out grid, and it's Buckmore local Samuel Bennett who qualified up on pole position for the first time in his EKS career. He picked Carl Gaffney to pole position by 6/1000ths of a second, whilst Ashley Mason King qualified up in P3 in what was his first visit to Buckmore. Ross Samuel though came through the field, having started in P4 to win the race by 1.7 seconds ahead of Samuel Bennett. Ross got past in the latter stages of the race. Samuel then held on to P2, with the charging Mark Puxty coming through from 11th on the grid to finish up in P3. Charlie Jackson did a great job to then hold on to P4 ahead of Richard Levitt, whilst Ashley Mason King came home in P6 ahead of Alex Bridger and Alex Haig. We can hear now from the race winner, Ross Samuel, who's talking to our 2023 heavyweight champion, Matthew Bolton.
How was that race win?
It was nice. It was good.
It was nice.
Got my work done early.
Just nice.
Yeah, it was
not lovely, not fantastic. It was nice.
It was nice.
It was nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was nice. Good, well planned. I would say.
It looked like a great race.
Yeah, no, I was pretty pleased with it. I mean, I got all my work done early, so I made 2 places up on the first lap, and then Sam had a bit of a gap to me, so I just tried to set consistent laps as fast as possible, and then caught him in about 2-3 laps and made the move, and that was pretty much it. I had a bit of a decent gap behind me, but he still kept me honest. He's quite quick as Sam, so.
The junior drivers then returned to the circuit for their second race of the day, and it's Frederick Burton who started on pole position once more, having taken the fastest lap of the race in race 1, whilst on his dominant drive to victory. Charlie Foster though did a fantastic job in this race to go from second on the grid to win the race by just under 7/10 of a second ahead of Jack Redfern. Those two had fantastic race long battle for the win, and it's Thomas Wong who did a brilliant job of coming through the field from 6th place on the grid to finish in P3 on his debut in the series. Frederick Burden meanwhile held on to P4, having had some issues earlier on in the race, whilst Alfie Shubb finished up in P5 ahead of Liam Healy. We can hear now from the second place driver Jack Redfern about how his first and second races of the day went.
And I'm joined by Jack Redfern. Jack, a good couple of performances from you. How are you feeling?
Quite confident. My first race, I think I finished third, but not too sure because penalties and everything. Second race, finished second. Battling, I got caught up to Charlie, had a little battle, but pulled away. Obviously had the better pace than me, but I've enjoyed it so far. Hopefully carry on to the third race.
The lightweight drivers then returned to the circuit for their second race of the day, and it's Carl Evans who was starting on pole position for this race, having come through the field in race 1 and set the fastest lap of the race. Callum Mendelow though came from 9th place on the grid to come through and win the race on the penultimate lap of the race in what was an epic battle with Carl Evans and an even more epic drive through the field. Callum ended up coming home just over a quarter of a second ahead of Carl Evans at the finish line, whilst Adam Barras did a brilliant job of holding on to P3, holding off Murray Ager in the closing stages of the race. Adam came home in at 3rd place, just 3/10 ahead of Murray, whilst James King came home in P5 ahead of Morgan Turk-Summer-Davija, who had a brilliant drive through the field from 13th place on the grid. Lawrence Seagrave impressed once more. He came home in P7 just behind Morgan, with Louis Draper just behind in P8. Murray Ager is trackside with Matthew Bolton, and he can talk us through how his race went.
Murray, how was that race?
It was good. Yeah, it was good. Started slow. I think it was a new kart on the grid, so cold tyres. Felt a bit understeer in the first couple of corners. Dropped 4, and then after, as soon as it heated up, it felt good under my hands.
But then when you got it going,
Yeah.
fastest lap of the race, pole for the next race.
Yep.
Can we expect to win?
I'm hoping so. Hopefully,
The
I can.
answer is yes.
Yes.
Yes, say it
hopefully,
with me.
yes.
I'm going to
Fingers
win.
Crossed, yes.
That is
I'm
the
gonna
attitude
win.
we want from EKS. Good luck in the next race. Before the carts come back round, we'll see you on track.
Thank you very much.
The heavyweight drivers then returned to the circuit for their second race of the day, and this was an absolutely brilliant battle for the win between two of the top drivers in the country in the heavyweight class. Mark Puxley started just ahead of Ross Samuel on the front row of the grid, but it's Ross Samuel who came home taking the victory by just under a 10th of a second ahead of Mark Puxley in what was an epic battle for the win and a foreshadowing of the Kart Racers Champions A final, which was not long to come. Charlie Jackson did a great job again to finish up in P3. He showed that he belongs right up at the sharp end in the heavyweight class. Was Richard Levitt impressed to finish in at P4 on his debut in the EKS? He finished just under a 10th of a second ahead of Charlie, in 4th position, just ahead of Samuel Bennett. Carl Gaffney meanwhile had a brilliant battle for P6 with a whole train of drivers. He came home in 6th place ahead of Ashley Mason King, with Mike Bennett impressing to finish up in P8. Barry Lewis meanwhile finished in P16 in this race, and he's with Matthew Bolton now and talk you through how his race went.
And now we're joined by Barry Lewis. Barry, how was that race and how's your day been so far?
Well, the race wasn't too bad. I obviously qualified P10 originally. Didn't feel like I had much in the first heat. Didn't feel like I had much coming out of the corners. Obviously qualified last for the second race. Made up a couple of positions. Lost one on the last lap. But much better. I felt a lot better. First event of the year for me.
Your debut.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
First track time since Boxing Day. So yeah, a bit brutal. I'm sure I'm going to ache a little bit tomorrow.
The junior drivers then returned to the circuit for their final race of the day, and it's Jack Redfern who was starting on pole position for this race, having set the fast lap of the race in race 2. He was starting just ahead of Charlie Foster, but Alfie Shubb got redemption after his race 1 incident to come through the field from 8th place on the grid to win the race by just under a quarter of a second ahead of Charlie Foster. Aston Lupton meanwhile impressed on his first visit to Buckmore Park. he battled with the leaders for the race win all the way until the end, and he came home just under 7/10 off of the victory in P3, pipping Jack Redfern to third place at the finish line, with Jack coming home just 600ths of a second behind in P4. Frederick Burden was unfortunately tangled up in the incident with Jack Redfern in the early stages of the race. He came across the line in P5 but was given a 5-second penalty for the bumper pass, and this allowed Thomas Wong to inherit P5 off him, with Frederick Burden dropping down to P6 at the finish. This race win was Alfie Shrub's first ever victory in a top split race in EKS, and we can hear now from him with Matthew Boulton.
And now we're joined by Alfie Shrub. Alfie, how was that race?
Yeah, it was really good.
Intense.
Intense, yeah. Enjoyed it. It's just the cold weather's out now, you feel it more, and it's starting to get a little more slippy.
Well, it seemed like there were about 8 of you just stuck like bumper to bumper. I mean,
Yeah.
Were you nervous at all you were going to lose that?
Well, yeah, obviously you've got like 2 good drivers behind you. You've got Charlie Foster and Jack Redfern behind me. It's obviously when you're out the front and that, and you know you've got like 5 minutes left, then it starts getting a lot harder for you to keep hold of the lead, obviously, because you're under so much pressure. But I just focused on my race and managed to hold on to it, not stress as much, and managed to win.
The penultimate race of the day then followed, and this very much was the race of the day. The lightweight drivers took to the circuit one last time, with Murray Ager starting all the way up in first position, having set the fastest lap of the race in lightweight race 2. And it's Callum Bendelo who started in P2 for this race. Callum only needed to finish in the top 8 in this race to secure himself his first ever overall victory in the EKS at his 17th time of trying. And it was an absolute barnstormer of a race, this one, as you will already have seen in the race of the day video. Adam Barris came through the field from 5th place on the grid to win the race in the dying moments, overtaking Murray Ager through hairpin 2, whilst Murray Ager did a fantastic job of defending to finish in P2 ahead of James King, with Elliot Gregory putting in another impressive display to finish in 4th place in his final race of the day. Chrissy Harding meanwhile had a best ever result in this race as she finished up in P5 just ahead of Kyle Evans, who was involved in a controversial incident with Callum Bendelo halfway through the race, going through Symes' sweep, where Callum was only just half a cut length alongside as they went into the corner, and contact then resulted in Callum Bendelo spinning. Callum came through the field though to finish in 7th place, having dropped down to P10 at one point and looking like he was going to miss out on his first overall victory. And his teammate Louis Draper came home just behind in P8 ahead of Lawrence Seagrave, and it was Andreas Dimitriadis who finished in P10 just 6 seconds off of the victory. Matthew Boulton is down at the side of the track with Adam Barris after he's just taken his first ever race win.
And we are now joined by Adam Barris. How was that? We need to go quickly because the Sodis are going to come any second. How was it?
It was really good. Yeah, not a great start, but managed to work my way up and win.
Well, a race win is a race win. Everybody seems particularly happy with you, including your sponsor that you were told to mention. Who is your sponsor?
It's racingevents.info.
There you go.
Trackside hospitality at Brands Hatch.
Exactly. And I've always wanted to say this because you did win. It seems that you had embarrassed the competition. Adam Barris? Yeah, there you go. All right, well done. Congratulations. There you go.
The heavyweight drivers then returned to the circuit for the final race of the day, and it was Ross Samuel who started on pole position alongside Mark Puxley once more, but Mark Puxley got the better of Ross this time round as he won the race in absolutely dominant fashion, winning the race by nearly 13 seconds ahead of Samuel Bennett and blitzing the field in terms of lap times too. Samuel Bennett finished in P2 in an absolute barnstormer of a finish in the battle for second place between himself, Ross Samuel and Charlie Jackson, with Ross and Charlie coming across the line side by side and being separated by 0.07 of a second at the finish line. Dave Rollins meanwhile impressed to finish up in P5 on his first time racing in the EKS, whilst Adam Thompson finished up in P6 ahead of Barney Williams, who was the leading super heavyweight driver in this race. All of this meant that Charlie Foster took home his first ever overall victory in the EKS, having been racing with us since the start of 2024, whilst Frederick Burden impressed immensely to finish in P2 on his first ever visit to Buckmore Park. Jack Redfern came home just behind him in P3, only 1 point behind, with Alfie Shrub impressing to finish up in P4 ahead of Thomas Wall. Aston Lupton and Zach Hassan were two Northerners who made the trip down for this event. They finished in P6 and 7 ahead of Oliver Cohen 8th. It was Liam Healy, Caden Bright, Jules Larkin and Stan Seaman making out the rest of the overall results. In the lightweight class, it is Callum Mendelo who clinched his first ever overall victory to come home, only 3 points ahead of Adam Barras, who got his first ever EKS podium in this event. James King showed that he's not just a DMAX specialist, as he came home in P3 ahead of Carl Evans, who impressed immensely on his debut in the series, whilst Murray Ager had a similarly impressive result to finish up in P5. He's a driver who's only just started outdoor karting. Lawrence Seagrave meanwhile finished all the way up in P6 and got the Driver of the Day award as well for doing so well, whilst Elliot Gregory finished in 7th place on his debut ahead of Chrissy Harding, who was over the moon with her 8th position. Andreas Dimitriadis came home in 9th place overall ahead of Louis Draper, and it's Morgan Turk Summit-Zavija who came home just ahead of Louis Wolven, who finished up in P12. Adam Prosser then finished in 13th place ahead of Janae Jones, who made the trip all the way down from up north, and it's Romario Ellis who finished in P15 ahead of Ryan Nicholas, who unfortunately got a shoulder injury during race 1 and could not continue beyond that. In the heavyweight class though, it was Ross Samwell who followed up his first ever overall victory at Tamworth with another overall victory, beating Mark Parksty by just 2 points. Samuel Bennett then came home in 3rd position on 133 points, just pipping Charlie Jackson to what would have been his first overall podium in the EKS, with Richard Levitt impressing immensely to finish up in P5, and it's Ashley Mason King who then tied for 6th position with Carl Gaffney and Alex Bridger. Ashley got P6 courtesy of having a faster lap time, and Dave Rollins finished up in 9th position ahead of Mike Bennett. Adam Thompson then beat Barney Williams, with Barney getting the trophy for the top super heavyweight driver, and it's Gabriel Norse who finished in 13th place ahead of Ash Shivers, with Henry Walter then in 15th place ahead of Barry Lewis, and it's Richie Warren who came home in 17th position ahead of Alex Haig, who unfortunately had to rush off home during the event, which is why he finished down in 18th position. 1 week later, and the EKS headed all the way up to Rowrah up in Cumbria, which is an 8.5 hour drive from Buckmore. You really cannot get two tracks further away from one another within England. 50 drivers turned out for this event, an incredible turnout for what was only the 3rd ever round of the Northern Championship, and the drivers for this were split up into a lightweight split 2, a combined lightweight split 1 and junior group, and then a dedicated heavyweight group. James Britton put it on pole position in the lightweight split 2 one-shot qualifying session. He beat Ben Thompson to pole position by just 0.02 of a second, and James Britton converted this pole position into victory as he drove off into the distance and won the opening race of the day by more than 7 seconds ahead of Matthew Dickinson. Ben Thompson meanwhile held on to P3 as he beat Josh Wynn, who came home in 4th position. Whilst Joel Metcalf had a great battle with Lewis Middleton, he came home in P5, whilst Lewis Middleton came through the field, having had an incident with Joel and a couple of other cars on lap 1 of the race. It's Lewis Middleton who beat Chrissy Harding, who had a great drive holding off a whole train of cars behind her. She finished in 7th place ahead of Ben Lockyer, with Adam Gudgeon and Romario Ellis finishing just behind. The EKS's top Northern junior and lightweight drivers then took to the circuit for their one-shot qualifying session, and it's Aston Lupton who put it on pole position on his first visit to Rowrah in the junior one-shot qualifying session. He beat Leon Parker by just over 1/3 of a second. Barry Lakes meanwhile put it on pole position in the lightweight class ahead of Lewis Ashforth, and then in the race is Aston Lupton who ended up taking the victory from the front row of the grid. He won the race by over 5 seconds ahead of Blake Hutton. This followed a dice between the two of them in the opening stages of the race, as you can see here on board with Leon Parker, and Leon ended up coming home in P3, 7.5 seconds off of the win. Lewis Blanche meanwhile put in an incredible performance on his first visit to Rowrah to go from 5th place on the grid to come through the field and win the race within the lightweight class by more than 3 seconds ahead of Hassan Zafar, whilst Lewis Ashforth held on to P3 at the finish, with Barry Lakes coming home in 4th place. Tom Shipman came home in P3 on the road, but he unfortunately had a bump and pass on Barry Lakes in the early stages of the race, going through Paddock Bend, and that as a result dropped him down to P5 after the race. 18 heavyweight drivers then took to the circuit for their first race of the day, but before that it's Colin Marshall who put it on pole position in the one-shot qualifying session. He beat Josh Pritchard to pole position, but it's Ross Samwell who came through from third place on the grid to win the race on his first ever visit to Rowrah. Colin Marshall then came home only 2.5 seconds behind in P2. He showed that he belongs right up at the sharp end, having also won at Tamworth in the final race of the day there, whilst Josh Pritchard held on to P3 and finished as a top super heavyweight driver in this race as he held off Andy Laister. The lightweight split 2 drivers then returned to the circuit for their second race of the day, and James Britton had been promoted up to split 1, so he did not take part in this race. But it's Tom Fox who actually started on pole position. He had issues in race 1. He was caught up in the lap 1 incident at Crash Bend, and Tom showed that he deserved to start at the front of the field as he drove off into the distance in this race. Incredibly though, going into Crash Corner on the last lap of the race, Tom Fox threw the lead away, having been 9 seconds in the lead. He spun out and Matthew Dickinson could not believe his eyes as he came out of Crash Corner on the final lap of the race. He saw Tom Fox sitting there, he drove past Tom Fox and he won the race by just over a second ahead of Tom, who was gutted at the finish. Ben Lockyer did a great job to finish up in P3, having started in 8th place on the grid, whilst Joel Metcalf impressed to finish up in P4 ahead of Ben Thompson, with Lewis Middleton unfortunately getting a 5-second penalty for curbs, and he finished down in 6th. The top junior and lightweight drivers then took to the circuit again for their second race of the day, with Aston Lupton starting on pole position again, having set the fastest lap of the race in race 1. Leon Parker though is a Rowrah local and he's the reigning junior Rotax champion here. He ended up winning the race by nearly 9 seconds ahead of Sam Mackerson as Leon put his track knowledge to good use, whilst Aston Lupton held on to finish in P3. Blake Hutton had a fantastic battle with both Liv Metcalf and Louis Callet throughout the race. They came home in 4th, 5th and 6th respectively, and they were all separated by just over half a second at the finish. Lewis Blench meanwhile led from lights to flag in the lightweight class as he followed up his race 1 victory with another victory here in race 2. He beat Tom Shipman to the win by just under 3 seconds at the finish, whilst Jamie Shipman-Chase recovered from issues in race 1 to finish up in P3 ahead of his teammate Hassan Safar, who just about beat James Britton on his first race in split 1. The heavyweight drivers then took to the circuit for their second race of the day, and it's Andy Laister who was starting on pole position for this race, and he is a driver who has a lot of experience here at Rowrah, both in go-karts and on quad bikes, and Andy put his track knowledge to good use to win this race by nearly 7 seconds ahead of Ian Wilson in what was Andy's first ever top split victory. Ian Wilson came through from 9th place on the grid to finish in P2 in what was his best EKS race result so far, whilst Anthony Deverill finished as the top super heavyweight driver in this race to finish all the way up in P3 ahead of Ryan Cooper. The lightweight split 2 drivers then returned to the circuit for their final race of the day. Matthew Dickinson had been promoted up to split 1 courtesy of his win in the previous race, and it was Tom Fox who was starting on pole position again for this race, and this time round Tom Fox made no mistakes as he blitzed the field and set the fastest lap of the day in the lightweight class to win the race by nearly 15 seconds ahead of Ben Lockyer. Ben held off a train of karts behind him at the finish to finish in P2, with Lewis Middleton impressing to finish in P3 just ahead of Joel Metcalf and Josh Wynn, and Ben Thompson came home in P6 just a second behind them at the finish. The top junior and lightweight drivers then took to the circuit for their final race of the day, and the race started with drama as James Britton forgot that he's not a junior driver and went with the junior drivers at the start. It was supposed to be a staggered start, but James caused carnage by going with the juniors. The lightweight drivers eventually did get underway, but the junior drivers were just behind after the lightweights got going. This made for fun and games for Leon Parker, who had started on pole position in the junior class. He had to pick his way through the lightweight drivers who were in a separate race to him. but it was Leon Parker who ended up winning the race within the junior class for nearly 10 seconds ahead of Aston Lupton, who had a fantastic battle with Blake Hutton to the finish, with the two of them being separated by less than 0.4 of a second at the finish line. Tom Shipman meanwhile went from pole position to win the race in the lightweight class, winning the race by nearly 9 seconds ahead of Adam Barras, who followed up his race win at Buckmore the week before with a P2 in this race, whilst Lewis Blench came home in P3 ahead of Jamie Shipman Chase. Lewis Ashforth sadly broke down during the race, but he was classified in P5 at the finish, whilst Freddie Winskell finally had a great result in this round as he finished up in P6. He had experienced issues in races 1 and 2, which put him at the back of the field in those two races. The final race of the day then saw all of the heavyweight drivers take the circuit one last time, and this was an absolute cracker of a race, as you have already seen in the race of the day video. It's Ross Samuel who came through from 17th place on the grid to win the race in what was a record for the EKS for the lowest starting position for a race winner. Hayden Harris got overtaken by Ross on the penultimate lap of the race, and it's Hayden who ended up holding on to P2 ahead of Colin Marshall, who had been in the battle for the lead earlier on in the race, whilst James Clare, who started on pole position, ended up holding on to P4 at the finish. Ryan Cooper impressed once more to finish up in P5, whilst it is Andy Leister who finished in P6 and wrapped up his first ever overall victory in the EKS, having never previously finished in the top 10 in the EKS in his 10 previous rounds. Leon Parker's two dominant drives in race 2 and 3 grabbed him the overall victory in the junior class as he beat Aston Lupton by just 3 points. Aston followed up his strong performance at Buckmore with his best ever result here at Rowrah, whilst Blake Hutton got his first ever podium in the EKS as he finished in P3, just ahead of Sam Mackinson, beating him by only 4 points. Liv Metcalf did well on only her second ever race outdoors to finish in P5, just ahead of Louis Callett, whilst Grace Mount finished 7th overall in what was her first ever race outdoors, just about beating Tyler Bartlett at Edgehill. Lewis Blench meanwhile won overall in the lightweight class to take home his first ever overall victory in the EKS. He did this with his first and third place finishes, and he beat Tom Shipman, who came home 7 points behind in P2 after finishing 5th, 2nd and 1st. Jamie Shipman Chase had car issues during the event. He always slotted himself back into position though, and he was classified 3rd overall on 128 points, just about beating his teammate Hassan Zafar, who came home just a point behind in 4th place, whilst Lewis Ashforth came home just a point behind in P5. Adam Barras finished up in P6 on his first visit to Rowrah. He made the trip all the way up from Crawley for this event, whilst Barry Lakes came home in P7, just ahead of James Britton, who started off the day racing in Split 2, but showed that he very much belongs in Split 1. Freddie Winskell had poor luck during the day, but he ended up finishing in P9, just ahead of Lewis Jolly, who similarly experienced bad luck, whilst Matthew Dickinson finished up in 11th place in the overall results, just ahead of Joel Metcalf, who classes as his best finish so far in the EKS. Ben Lockyer did well on his debut to finish in P13 ahead of Ben Thompson, with Lewis Middleton coming home in 15th place ahead of Josh Wynn, whilst Tom Fox rued his issues in races 1 and 2. He came home in P17, but he will surely be racing in Split 1 sometime very soon. Aaron Dennis came home in 18th place ahead of Adam Gudgeon, with Maury Ellis beating Chrissy Harding to 20th overall. Chrissy came home in 21st ahead of Hugh Morrington, and it's Sam Etherington and Paul Whitehill who rounded out the overall standings in the lightweight class. Andy Leister though took a remarkable overall victory in the heavyweight class, beating Ross Samuel by just 4 points. Ross Samuel had car issues in race 2, which is why he finished down in P16 in that race. That issue cost him dearly, whilst Ryan Cooper had a strong set of results to finish up in 3rd place in the overall results on what was his debut in the series. Colin Marshall had similar issues to Ross in race 2. He ended up recovering though to finish in 4th place overall ahead of Ian Wilson, who had his best result so far in the EKS, whilst James Clare had his best ever result in the EKS to finish up in P6. He was tied for points though with Hayden Harris, Anthony Deverell and Alex Haig, with the 4 of them being split by their fastest lap times. Bilal Khan did well to finish up in P10 on his debut in the series, whilst James Miller came all the way down from Dundee for this event and he finished up in P11 ahead of Josh Pritchard, with Alex Cowley coming home in 13th position ahead of Dan Cooper. Xiaofeng Yang came home then in 15th overall ahead of Simon Fulton, who unfortunately experienced poor luck throughout the event, whilst Mark Elsden came home in 17th place ahead of Adam Thompson. That brings to an end this extended highlights video from rounds 4 and 5 of the season, and an incredible 89 different people raced in these two events, in a sign of things to come, and we hope to see you all this Saturday at Daytona Milton Keynes.